The grease-laden air of the Silver Spoon Diner was a thick, clinging blanket, a shroud woven from the ghosts of 1,000,000 fried eggs and countless pots of burnt coffee. For Clara Evans, it was the smell of stagnation. At 24, she felt 40. Each sticky countertop she wiped, each plate of lukewarm fries she delivered, was a small, grinding reminder of the life she wasn't living, the dreams she'd been forced to shelve. Her world had shrunk to the space between the diner's swinging kitchen doors and the monthly bill from Maple Creek Memory Care, a bill that grew with the same relentless cruelty as the disease that was stealing her grandmother. Tonight, however, a single, reflexive act of decency for a distraught old man lost in a torrential downpour was about to shatter her monotonous reality. Because the next day, it wasn't a forgotten scarf or a thank you note that would arrive at her station. It would be a silent, menacing black Cadillac, 2 men built like granite monoliths, and a question that would become the first shot in a war for a man's soul. It was 9:10 on a Thursday night in October, and the heavens had opened with a biblical fury. Rain hammered the plate glass windows of the diner, turning the neon sign into a blurry, bleeding watercolor of pink and blue. Each drop that slid down the glass felt like an accusation, a tiny tear for the life that was slipping through her fingers. Clara's reflection stared back at her from the darkened window, a ghost with tired eyes and a set jaw. The exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was a deep, cellular weariness, the kind that came from balancing 2 jobs, endless paperwork, and the hollow ache of watching the person who raised you forget your name. Her grandmother Eleanor was her anchor and her heaviest burden. Alzheimer's was a thief, and Clara was its sole witness, watching it pilfer memories, personality, and dignity, leaving behind a confused, frightened shell of the vibrant woman who had taught her how to draw, how to dream. The dream had been architecture. Her small apartment was still cluttered with textbooks she couldn't bear to sell, their pages filled with the elegant, logical beauty of blueprints and structural designs. That dream had died 2 years ago, when Eleanor's forgetfulness had become a full-blown crisis, and the cost of full-time care had become Clara's full-time reality. A fresh invoice for $6,800 lay on her kitchen table, a crisp white executioner's warrant next to a second notice eviction letter. "Evans, table 6 needs a check. Stop daydreaming," Mel barked from behind the grill. Mel wasn't a bad man, just a man whose own dreams had long ago been deep-fried into bitter resignation. He ran the diner with the grim efficiency of a ship's captain navigating a perpetual storm. "On it, Mel." Clara forced a smile, grabbing the check. Her sneakers, cushioned with cheap drugstore insoles, made a soft, squelching sound on the linoleum. The couple at table 6, tourists who'd complained about everything, left a $3 tip on a $50 bill. She palmed the crumpled bills, a small, pathetic sting of humiliation. "All right, that's it. I'm shutting her down," Mel announced, wiping his hands on his apron. "Lock up when you're done. And for God's sake, scrub the grout behind the counter. It's starting to look like a science experiment." He was gone before she could reply, the bell over the door tinkling a tinny, indifferent farewell. Clara locked the door, flipped the sign from open to closed, and rested her forehead against the cool, vibrating glass. The streetlights of this forgotten corner of Philadelphia smeared and swam in the downpour. All she wanted was to climb into her 20-year-old Toyota, a rattling rust bucket she'd nicknamed the Tenacity, drive to her cramped apartment, and maybe, if she was lucky, have a 10-minute phone call with a nurse who could tell her Eleanor had had a calm day. She began the closing ritual, a soul-numbing ballet of industrial cleaner and hot water. She scrubbed the coffee machine, mopped the floor where a child had spilled a milkshake, and hauled the heavy, reeking trash bags to the dumpster in the alley. By the time she finished, it was nearly 10. The rain, impossibly, had intensified. She grabbed her threadbare jacket, the zipper permanently jammed halfway, and dug her keys from her pocket. As she stepped into the alley, pulling up her hood as a futile defense, she saw him. He was huddled under the diner's flimsy, leaking awning, a small island of misery in a raging sea. He was old, perhaps in his late 80s, his frame bird-like and frail beneath a drenched tweed overcoat that seemed a relic from a more dignified era. He wasn't just holding bags, he was desperately trying to protect them. One was a worn leather satchel, the other a long, cylindrical cardboard tube, the kind architects and artists used. It was dark and damp, its structural integrity clearly compromised by the ruin. He was shivering violently, his pale, liver-spotted hands fumbling with the satchel's buckle. As Clara watched, his numb fingers failed him. The satchel slipped, spilling a small, leather-bound journal and a cascade of loose papers onto the slick, grimy pavement. "Oh, blast it all," he whispered, his voice a reedy sigh swallowed by the storm. He bent slowly, his joints protesting with visible effort, trying to retrieve his scattered belongings. At that moment, a city bus roared past, hitting a deep puddle and sending a massive, filthy wave of street water arcing through the air. It crashed over him, drenching him completely and scattering the papers further. The old man didn't curse or cry out. He just flinched, his shoulders sagging with the finality of utter defeat. Clara's feet felt rooted to the spot. "Go home, Clara. You're exhausted. You can't afford another problem. You can't save the world." The voice of the administrator from Maple Creek echoed in her ears from their call that morning. "We're not a charity, Ms. Evans. Payment is due on the 1st. The old man tried to gather the papers, but they were already turning to pulp. He reached for the cardboard tube, which had rolled precariously close to a rushing gutter. A deep sigh escaped Clara's lips, lost in the wind. Damn it! She walked out from the relative shelter of the alley into the full force of the downpour. "Sir?" The old man looked up, startled. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, magnified by thick, wire-rimmed spectacles that were streaked with rain. He looked less like a person and more like a forgotten photograph. "Sir, do you need a hand?" "Oh," he stammered, his voice raspy with cold. "No, my dear. I'm quite all right. Just a bit of a muddle." He attempted a smile, but it was a pained, chattering grimace. "You're soaked through," Clara stated, her voice taking on the no-nonsense tone she used with difficult customers. She was already kneeling, carefully peeling the soggy journal from the pavement. "Where are you headed?" The lamplighter inn," he said, pointing a trembling finger down the dark, forbidding street. "It's just a few blocks." Clara's heart sank. The lamplighter was a good mile away, a transient motel known for bedbugs and desperation. In this weather, for a man his age, it might as well be on the other side of the moon. "That's too far to walk in this storm," Clara said, making a decision that felt both foolish and inevitable. She carefully handed him the ruined journal. "My car is right here. It's not much, but it's dry. Let me give you a ride." "Oh, I couldn't possibly impose," he insisted, though his body language screamed surrender. "You are very kind, but it's not an imposition, it's just structural integrity," Clara said, the architectural term slipping out unexpectedly. "You're about to collapse. Now I'm Clara. You grab the satchel. I'll get the tube." She looked at the soggy cardboard cylinder with a strange pang of professional sympathy. Whatever was in it was likely ruined. The man looked from her determined face to his precious, disintegrating tube, and finally to the merciless, sheeting rain. "I'm Silas," he said, finally relenting. "Thank you, Clara." She gently took the heavy, damp tube from him, cradling it like a fragile relic, while he clutched the satchel to his chest. She led him to the Tenacity, which looked even more forlorn under the streetlights. She carefully placed the tube on the back seat, covering it with her own jacket before opening the creaking passenger door for him. He sank into the seat, its torn upholstery leaking foam stuffing. The car smelled of her life, faintly of diner grease, cheap air freshener, and the subtle scent of the antiseptic soap from Maple Creek. "Thank you," he said again, his voice barely a whisper. "You are a remarkably decent young woman." "Just getting out of the rain, Silas," Clara said, sliding behind the wheel. The engine took 3 sputtering, protesting tries before catching with a shudder. The check engine light, her most faithful companion, flickered on, glowing with cheerful malevolence. "She has character," Silas observed, looking at the light. Clara let out a short, tired laugh. "That's a polite word for it." The drive was short, the car's interior a small, rattling bubble of quiet against the storm. The only sounds were the frantic, rhythmic squeak thump of the worn-out wipers and the old man's shallow, rattling breaths. The smell of wet wool filled the car, but beneath it, there was something else. A faint, clean scent of old paper and cedar. A scent at odds with his drenched and disheveled appearance. "You're not from this neighborhood," Clara said, breaking the silence. The Lamplighter Inn was not a tourist hotspot. "No, my dear." "Not exactly," Silas replied, his gaze fixed on the rain-lashed world outside. "I'm looking for something I lost a long time ago." "A lot of that going around," Clara murmured, thinking of her own lost future. She swerved to avoid a pothole the size of a small crater. "The Lamplighter. It's not the nicest place. Are you meeting family there?" "No, no family," he said, and the sudden, sharp edge of grief in his voice was so profound it made Clara flinch. "I'm just trying to get my bearings. The world changes so quickly. The foundations aren't what they used to be." "Tell me about it," Clara said, pulling into the motel's cracked and pitted parking lot. The neon sign was missing 2 letters, proclaiming it the Lamp Inn. It was a grim, 2-story structure with peeling paint and balconies that sagged like a tired frown. She parked as close to the office door as she could. "Well, here we are." The rain was still a solid wall of water. Clara looked at Silas, who was staring at the lobby. Through the grimy glass, they could see a single, buzzing fluorescent light illuminating a bored-looking clerk behind a thick pane of scratched plexiglass. "All right, stay put," Clara commanded. "I'll get your bags to the door." "Oh no, you've done far too much already." "I'm already soaked," she cut him off. "It makes no difference." She hopped out, ran to the back door, retrieved the precious tube and his satchel, and carried them to the lobby door, propping it open with her foot. She waved him on. Silas scurried from the car to the lobby, his old legs moving with a surprising burst of desperate energy. Inside, under the flickering light, he looked impossibly small and frail. Clara set his things down just inside the door, a puddle forming around them. The clerk didn't even look up from his phone. "You should be okay from here," she said. Silas was fumbling inside his wet coat. He produced a worn leather wallet that, despite its age, was clearly made of fine material. He extracted a crumpled $10 bill. "Please, my dear, for your trouble, for your gasoline," he insisted, holding it out with a trembling hand. Clara stared at the $10. That was lunch for 3 days. That was a fraction of a percent of her grandmother's bill, but it was something. She needed that money more than she needed her next breath. She shook her head. "No, Silas, I can't. I insist. A kindness deserves a kindness." "Keep it," Clara said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Get yourself a hot cup of coffee from that machine over there. You look like you need it more than I do." She gently pushed his hand, and the money, back toward him. For the first time, the old man's watery blue eyes seemed to truly focus. He wasn't just looking at her. He was seeing her. The frayed collar of her uniform, the deep-set exhaustion in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment. "You have a good heart, Clara Evans," he said, his reedy voice suddenly imbued with a strange, quiet authority. "You have integrity. Don't ever let this world grind it out of you. It is worth more than all the steel and glass in this city." Clara, taken aback by the poetic intensity of the statement, could only nod. "Just stay dry, Silas. Good night." She turned and fled back through the deluge to her car, not looking back. She didn't see the old man straighten his posture, the frail stoop lessening as he watched her drive away. She didn't see him turn to the clerk, his demeanor shifting from that of a lost soul to one of quiet command. And she certainly didn't see him pull a sleek, black, unlimited limit credit card from that same battered wallet and say, "A room for the night, the quietest you have, and I need to use your telephone. It's a matter of some urgency." Clara drove home, the wipers beating their lonely rhythm. She felt a strange hollowness. The $10-sized hole in her pocket was a tangible ache, but underneath it there was a tiny, unfamiliar warmth from her small act of defiance against the sheer, grinding misery of the night. It was a flickering ember in a blizzard, but it was enough to light her way home. When she walked into her apartment, the eviction notice on the counter seemed to glow with malevolent energy. The ember died instantly, smothered by the cold, crushing weight of her reality. She had helped one lost soul, but she was no closer to saving the two that mattered most, her grandmother and herself. The next morning, the world had not been magically reset. The rain had passed, leaving behind a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Clara had managed 4 hours of sleep, her dreams a chaotic slideshow of eviction notices and Eleanor's confused, pleading face. She arrived at the Silver Spoon at 7, the air still thick with the ghosts of last night's dinner rush. Mel was already there, his mood as grey as the sky. "The new kid, Jimmy, called out sick," Mel grumbled, not looking up from the inventory clipboard. "Stomach flu. Again. It's just you and me for the breakfast rush. Try to keep up." "I always keep up," Clara muttered, tying on her apron. The morning was a frantic blur of impatient customers, sizzling bacon, and the constant hiss of the espresso machine. Clara moved with the practiced grace of a soldier in a trench, her smile a piece of well-worn armor. She refilled coffee for Mr. Gable, who always complained about politics. She took the complicated order from the family, with 3 screaming children. She was a machine, powered by caffeine and desperation. By 10:30, the chaos had subsided to a low simmer. Clara was wiping down the counter, her mind already calculating whether she could sell her grandmother's old silverware for a few $100s when the bell above the door chimed. It wasn't the usual cheerful tinkle. It was followed by a heavy, expectant silence. The few remaining customers, Mr. Gable, and a young woman typing on a laptop, all looked up, a collective sense of unease settling over the diner. Clara lifted her head. A gleaming black Cadillac Escalade was parked at the curb, taking up 2 spaces. It was the kind of vehicle that didn't drive, but proceeded. 2 men were getting out. They were not diner customers. They wore dark, impeccably tailored suits that seemed to absorb the light around them. They were both large, with the impassive, watchful eyes of predators. One stayed by the car, his hand resting casually near the inside of his jacket. The other, a man in his late 40s with a square jaw and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, walked into the diner. He moved with a quiet, coiled energy that made the air feel thick. He didn't glance at the menu board. His cold grey eyes scanned the room and landed squarely on Clara. He walked to the counter and stood before her. "Clara Evans?" he asked. His voice was low and flat, like stones grinding together. Clara's hand, holding a damp rag, froze mid-swipe. "Yes. Can I help you?" The man, who she would later know only as Fletcher, slid a high-end smartphone across the counter. The screen showed a grainy, time-stamped photo from a security camera. It was Silas, pictured leaving the lobby of the Lamplighter Inn in the pre-dawn darkness. "You were seen with this man last night. Around 10 p.m., you drove him to the Lamplighter Inn in a green 2004 Toyota Corolla, license plate GZL 4815. It was not a question. It was an indictment. A spike of ice shot through Clara's veins. Her throat went dry. I see a lot of people. This is a diner." Fletcher leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "Don't play games. It's a waste of my time and your good health. We traced his burner phone to the motel. The night clerk, for a small fee, became extremely helpful. He described a waitress in a beat-up Toyota. That's you. Now where did he go?" Her mind reeled. Was Silas a criminal? On the run? Had she aided a fugitive? She thought of Eleanor, of what would happen if she were arrested. She couldn't be involved in this. "I just gave him a ride," she whispered, her voice trembling. It was raining. He was just an old man. "He's an old man, all right," Fletcher said, with a dismissive sneer. "A confused, sentimental old man. His family is deeply concerned. He's unwell. He wanders off, gets taken advantage of by opportunistic people." He let his eyes drift over her worn uniform, the implication clear. "He seemed fine to me," Clara said, a spark of defiance cutting through her fear. Fletcher's cold eyes narrowed. "He is a sick man who is in possession of private family documents that do not belong to him. His grandson is very anxious to get him and the documents back. Safely. So I'll ask you one more time. Where is he?" "How would I know?" Clara's voice rose, bordering on frantic. "I dropped him off. That's it. I swear." Mel, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway with a dish towel twisted in his hands, finally scurried over, his face pale. "Is there a problem here, sir? Clara, what did you do?" "She's being uncooperative," Fletcher said, his gaze locked on Clara. "We're private investigators, hired by the family to locate a vulnerable missing person. She'll tell you." "Tell him, Clara," Mel pleaded, his voice cracking. "We don't want any trouble." "I already told you," Clara cried, her panic boiling over into frustration. "I dropped him at the motel. I haven't seen him since. I don't know anything." Fletcher studied her for a long, unnerving moment, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be calculating whether she was a liar or simply irrelevant. He apparently settled on the latter. "He's not at the motel," Fletcher stated flatly. "Checked out at 4 a.m. Paid cash. Vanished." He reached into his suit and pulled out a business card, slapping it down on the counter. The card was thick, black, with silver embossed lettering. Julian Thorne, CEO, Thorne Development Group. "That's the grandson," Fletcher said. "If you see Silas again, If he makes any attempt to contact you, you call that number. Immediately. Understand? If we find out you heard from him and kept it to yourself, well, we aren't the police. Our methods for encouraging cooperation are much more direct." He turned without another word. "We're leaving." The two men exited as silently as they had arrived, folding themselves back into the black Cadillac. The vehicle pulled away from the curb with a smooth, powerful surge and disappeared. The diner was utterly silent. Mr. Gable looked as if he'd swallowed his tongue. The woman with the laptop had her phone out, clearly having recorded the entire exchange. Mel turned on Clara, his face a blotchy, terrified red. "What in God's name was that, Clara? Who are you bringing into my diner? Thorn Development? They're tearing down half the city to build skyscrapers. Are you in some kind of trouble?" "No, I don't know," Clara choked out, tears of fear and humiliation finally welling in her eyes. I just gave an old man a ride." "Well, you just scared off half my morning regulars," Mel snapped, his fear curdling into anger. "Go. Take your break. Go in the back. I don't want customers thinking we've got mob ties." Humiliated, terrified, and shaking, Clara fled to the tiny, closet-sized break room. She collapsed onto a stack of boxes of napkins, buried her face in her hands, and let out the first of a series of wrenching, ragged sobs. She had done one small, decent thing in a world that was relentlessly indecent, and it was about to cost her everything she had left. Clara spent nearly half an hour in the break room, her violent sobs eventually giving way to the dry, hiccuping breaths of emotional exhaustion. She splashed cold water on her face from the rust-stained utility sink, staring at the stranger in the cracked mirror. "Get it together, Evans. Crying won't pay for Maple Creek." She squared her shoulders, smoothed her apron, and pushed the door open, bracing herself for Mel's simmering rage and the curious stares of the customers. She stepped out and stopped dead. Mel was standing by the counter, his mouth hanging open. Mr. Gable and the laptop woman were gawking at the street again. Another car was parked out front. This was not the brutish, intimidating Escalade. This was a dark grey Bentley Mulsanne, a vehicle so sleek and silent it seemed to have materialized out of thin air. It radiated a kind of quiet, astronomical wealth that made the Escalade look like a child's toy. A woman was emerging from the back seat. If Fletcher and his partner were off-the-rack thugs, this woman was bespoke elegance. She wore a charcoal grey suit of such perfect tailoring it seemed sculpted to her form. Her silver-blonde hair was pulled back in a severe but flawless chignon. She carried a slim leather portfolio and moved with the unhurried grace of someone who owned every room she entered. The bell chimed softly as she opened the door, as if afraid to make too much noise in her presence. She didn't scan the room with nervous energy. Her sharp, intelligent eyes took in the scene, Mel's slack-jawed expression, the staring customers, and then settled, with unnerving precision, on Clara. She walked directly to the counter, the quiet, authoritative click of her heels on the linoleum floor, the only sound in the diner. She smelled faintly of jasmine, and, Clara imagined, of victory. "Miss Clara Evans?" the woman asked. Her voice was crisp, cultured, and carried an implicit expectation of being obeyed. Still shaken from the encounter with Fletcher, Clara found her voice. "Who's asking?" A small, knowing smile touched the woman's lips. "A reasonable question, considering the events of the last hour. My name is Evelyn Reed. I am Chief Counsel for the Blackwood Architectural Foundation, and I am here on behalf of Mr. Silas Blackwood." Clara's entire body went rigid. "Blackwood? Not Thorn?" She pointed a trembling finger at the business card Fletcher had left on the counter. Miss Reed's gaze followed her finger, An expression of profound distaste crossed her features, as if she were looking at a cockroach. "Ah, Julian," she said, picking up the card between her thumb and forefinger. "Precisely not. Julian Thorne is Mr. Blackwood's estranged grandson. The men who visited you earlier, Mr. Fletcher and his associate, are contractors. They are not affiliated with us. In fact, they work in direct opposition to my client's interests." She tore the card in half, then in quarters, and dropped the pieces into a nearby trash can with surgical neatness. "Mr. Blackwood," she continued, her attention returning to Clara, "the man you know as Silas sent me. He was deeply moved by your actions last night. He extends his sincerest apologies for the aggressive theatrics of his grandson." Clara's head was spinning. "I don't understand. Is he okay? Those men said he was confused, that he wasn't well." Evelyn Reed let out a short, dry laugh. It was the sound of fine crystal shattering. "Confused? Miss Evans, Silas Blackwood is one of the most brilliant architectural minds of the 20th century. He is a living legend. He is eccentric, he is reclusive, and he is a billionaire many times over. But he is most assuredly not confused." The word billionaire detonated in the quiet diner. Mel, behind the counter, made a sound like a deflating tire. "Then what was he doing at the Lamplighter Inn?" Clara whispered. "In that coat?" Ms. Reed's professional demeanour softened fractionally. "Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private. My client has a proposal for you, a rather significant one, and he believes you may be the only person who can help him in return." Mel, his eyes as wide as saucers, practically shoved them toward his cluttered back office. "My office. Use my office. It's private. Clara, go on. Take the year off if you need to." Feeling as though she'd stepped into an alternate reality, Clara followed the impossibly poised woman into Mel's tiny office, which smelled of stale cigar smoke and desperation. Ms. Reed remained standing, placing her portfolio on the messy desk. "What I'm about to tell you is of a highly sensitive and confidential nature," she began, her voice low and serious. "What you did last night was more than just a simple act of kindness. It was a test." Clara just stared, mute. "Silas Blackwood," Evelyn explained, "has come to believe his great wealth is a curse. It has isolated him, surrounded him with sycophants, and, in the case of his grandson, predators. Julian has been trying for years to have Silas declared legally incompetent. He wants to gain control of the Blackwood estate and, more importantly, Blackwood's architectural legacy. Julian is a developer. He sees his grandfather's iconic, landmarked buildings not as art, but as valuable real estate to be demolished and replaced with soulless glass boxes. So those men, Fletcher, were hired by Julian to follow his grandfather, to gather evidence for his incompetency hearing, to build a narrative that Silas is a senile old man wandering the streets, a danger to himself and the family fortune. But why was he there? Why the disguise? It wasn't a disguise, Evelyn said softly. That was his father's coat, and he wasn't wandering. He was searching. 20 years ago, his wife, Eleanor, a brilliant architect in her own right, passed away. Before she died, she completed one final design, a public library. It was her masterpiece. The original, hand-drawn blueprints were her legacy to him. And last week, during a transfer of documents from his archives, they were stolen. Clara's breath hitched. We believe Julian arranged the theft, Evelyn continued, her voice cold as steel. He wants to destroy them, to erase that part of his family's history. Silas was devastated. He refused to involve the police, fearing Julian would destroy the plans out of spite. So he took matters into his own hands. He's been searching the city, following a lead on a dealer in rare documents. He was dressed as he was to avoid attention. The cardboard tube you rescued from the gutter. Miss Evans that contained his wife's life's work. Clara's blood ran cold, then hot. The sheer, awful weight of what she had held in her hands settled upon her. He was at his lowest point when he met you, Evelyn said, her sharp eyes softening. He was cold, defeated, and had just lost the most precious thing in the world to him. And you helped him. You protected his wife's legacy, even without knowing what it was. You treated that tube with care. And then you refused his money. You, a young woman who, our subsequent background check revealed, is under crushing financial strain, refused $10 from a man you believed had nothing. Evelyn slid a tablet from her portfolio and turned it to face Clara. On the screen was a photograph of a smiling, vibrant woman with kind eyes, standing next to a younger Clara. It was Eleanor, years ago. We know about your grandmother, Clara. We know about Maple Creek. We know about the eviction notice. Tears began to stream silently down Clara's face, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of despair. They were tears of shock, of a terrible, beautiful release. Mr. Blackwood wants to help you, Evelyn said. This is not charity. It is, in his words, a professional commission. He is investing in integrity. She slid a thick folder across the desk. With trembling hands, Clara opened it. The first page was a letter, written in a shaky but elegant architectural script. Dear Clara, last night you saved more than an old man from the rain. You saved his faith. You have the eyes of an architect. You see the value in things others discard. Please allow me to return the favor. This is not a gift. It is a transaction. You rescued my past. I would like to offer you a future. Sincerely, Silas Blackwood. The second page was a list of proposals. 1. The immediate transfer of Eleanor Evans to the Atherton Institute for Neurocognitive Research in Baltimore. All expenses, including private medical transport, to be covered in perpetuity. 2. The full and immediate settlement of all outstanding debts, medical and personal, held by Clara Evans. 3. A fully funded, salaried apprenticeship at the Blackwood Architectural Foundation, with direct mentorship from Silas Blackwood to complete her architectural degree and licensure. 4. A secure, fully furnished apartment in the historic Blackwood Tower, effective immediately. Clara read the list twice, the words blurring. This wasn't real, it was a fever dream. This can't be. I assure you it is very real, Evelyn said. All you have to do is accept. Why? Clara whispered, looking up. Why all of this? It was just a ride. That is precisely the point, Evelyn replied. To you it was just a ride. To him it was proof. Proof that his grandson is wrong about the world. Proof that integrity is not a commodity. Now, about how you can help us. Evelyn's face grew serious. Julian is desperate. When he finds out his grandfather has made contact with you, he will be furious. He will assume you are a con artist, a gold digger who has somehow manipulated his way into Silas's confidence. He will come after you. What do you need me to do? Silas's incompetency hearing is in 2 weeks. Julian's entire case rests on the idea that Silas is mentally unfit, being taken advantage of by strangers. We need you to testify, to tell the court exactly what happened, that you are not a criminal, but a citizen who helped another, that Silas was not confused, but a man on a mission. Your testimony, as an objective third party, could destroy Julian's case. Clara looked at the folder, at the promise of a future she had long ago mourned, She thought of Fletcher's cold eyes, of the threat in his voice. She was a waitress. She was terrified. But as she looked at Silas's letter, something inside her solidified. She was also the granddaughter of Eleanor Evans, a woman who had never backed down from a fight in her life. She closed the folder. "Okay," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But the apartment, the apprenticeship, it's too much. Just help my grandmother. That's all I ask. Get her to that clinic." Evelyn Reed stared at Clara, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. "Oh, he was right about you," she murmured. "He said you'd try to negotiate against yourself. Miss Evans, the offer is non-negotiable. You will accept the entire package because that is my client's wish. And because, frankly, you are going to need that secure apartment." As if on cue, the bell on the diner door didn't just chime, it crashed. The door slammed open against the wall with a splintering crack. Mel yelped, "Hey, you can't go back there!" The office door flew open, the cheap wood of the frame shattering. A man stood there, framed in the doorway like a portrait of pure, aristocratic rage. He was tall and handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way, dressed in a bespoke suit that cost more than Clara made in a year. His dark hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes were blazing with a furious, entitled fire. Fletcher stood just behind him, looking grim. "There you are," the man snarled, his eyes locking on Evelyn. "Procuring another one of his charity cases, are we, Evelyn?" He stormed into the tiny office, his venomous gaze falling on Clara. It was a look of such profound, dismissive loathing that it felt like a physical slap. "And you," Julian Thorne spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You little gutter rat. How much? How much is the old fool paying you for this little performance? 50,000? 100? Name your price. I'll double it right now for you to walk away and sign an affidavit stating he's completely insane." The tiny office seemed to vibrate with the force of his fury. Clara felt pinned by his stare, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was the man who wanted to destroy a library. This was the man who had stolen a dead woman's legacy. Evelyn Reed, however, looked merely inconvenienced. "Julian," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as an icicle, "you are trespassing, and you are making a scene. It's terribly undignified." "Don't you dare talk to me about dignity," he roared, turning on her. "You enable him. He's senile. He's giving away my inheritance, my family's legacy, to waitresses with sob stories." His wild eyes swung back to Clara. "So that's the angle, is it? The sick grandmother? A classic, truly pathetic. Did you wheel her out on a street corner too?" That was it. The fear inside Clara didn't just vanish, it transmuted into a pure, cold, clarifying rage. "Don't you talk about my grandmother," she said, her voice low and shaking. But not with fear. Julian let out a cruel, barking laugh. "Oh, I touched a nerve. It's a good grift, I'll give you that. But the game is over." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a platinum checkbook and a gold pen. "This is your last chance. Take my money and disappear, or I will bury you. You will be tied up in litigation until that demented old woman of yours is nothing but a distant—" He didn't get to finish the sentence. Clara stood up so fast, the rickety chair flew backwards and hit the wall. She was shorter than him, poorer, less powerful in every conceivable way. But she walked right up to him until she was inches from his expensive, soulless suit. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice a blade. "I didn't know who he was. I helped an old man because he was in trouble. I protected what he was carrying because he was trying so desperately to save it. You call it a sob story. I call it being a human being. She jabbed a finger hard into his chest. You look at him and you see a bank account. I looked at him and I saw a person. Julian's handsome face twisted in disbelief. He was not accustomed to being challenged. Fletcher, get her away from me. Fletcher stepped forward and grabbed Clara's arm in a bruising grip. You heard him, lady. Back off. Do not touch her. Evelyn's voice sliced through the air. She held up her phone, its camera light glowing. Mr. Fletcher, that is assault. Mr. Thorne, you are on private property, harassing and attempting to bribe a witness in a pending legal case. This entire conversation has been recorded. Furthermore, Mr. Blackwood's actual security detail, who, unlike your hired thugs, are licensed professionals, are waiting outside. I suggest you leave before I have you both arrested. Julian glanced past Evelyn. Standing just inside the diner's main entrance were two new men. They were tall, fit, and wore simple, dark suits that fit perfectly. They had earpieces and the calm, hyper-aware demeanor of former special forces. They were not bodyguards. They were operators. One of them met Evelyn's gaze and gave a subtle, affirmative nod. Fletcher, recognizing a superior predator, instantly released Clara's arm and took a step back. Julian was cornered. His two primary weapons, threats and money, had failed spectacularly. A dark, ugly flush crept up his neck. He smoothed his suit jacket, his face a mask of cold fury. This isn't over, he hissed at Clara, his voice a venomous whisper. You've chosen your side. You've allied yourself with a senile old fool. When I win, and I will win, I am going to strip you of every last cent. I will make it my personal mission to see you back in this grease pit, and your grandmother in a state-run ward. I will see you in court. I look forward to it, Evelyn said, smiling brightly. Before Julian could retort, Clara spoke again, her voice clear and carrying. You won't win, because you don't understand what you stole. Julian paused, intrigued despite himself. And what's that, little waitress? Some senile scribbles in a tube? Clara shook her head, a small, sad smile on her lips. I'm studying to be an architect, or I was. I only saw a corner of one of the drawings when it spilled, but I saw it. The line work, the weight of the ink, the cross-hatching on the sectional perspective. It was masterful. It wasn't just a building, it was a statement. It had integrity. It had a soul. She looked him dead in the eye. Something you wouldn't recognize if it was etched on your own heart. You can't win because you've already lost the only thing that ever mattered. The color drained from Julian's face. He had been dismissed, not with anger, but with a quiet, professional pity that was infinitely more insulting. He was left with nothing to say. He turned and stormed out of the diner, Fletcher trailing in his wake like a beaten dog. The professional security men stepped aside, their expressions unchanging as Julian fled to his car. The silence that descended on the small office was absolute. Clara finally let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 years. Her legs gave out, and she sank back into the chair. Evelyn calmly put her phone away. Well, she said, with profound understatement. That was bracing. She looked at Clara, her expression a mixture of respect and awe. The soul of the building. He's going to love that. Mel was standing in the shattered doorway, his face the color of raw bread dough. He broke my door. Send my office the invoice for a new door, a new frame, and $10,000 for emotional distress, Evelyn said without blinking. Now, Clara, we're leaving. Leaving? But my shift. Evelyn and Mel both stared at her, as if she'd just started speaking another language. Clara, Mel finally managed, his voice a squeak. I think you're fired. Or promoted to customer. You can't work here. You have integrity." "He's right," Evelyn said, picking up her portfolio. "Your employment here is terminated. Mr. Daniels, one of my associates outside, will get your belongings. Your grandmother's sitter has already been contacted. She is packing a bag for Eleanor. A medical transport team is on their way to Maple Creek as we speak. You and I are going to the airfield to meet them." This is so fast." "That, Miss Evans," Evelyn said, guiding her out of the ruined office, "is how we win. Julian relies on brute force. We rely on precision and speed." She paused at the diner's front door, turning Clara to face her. "You were exceptionally brave in there." "I was terrified," Clara admitted. "Bravery is not the absence of fear, Clara," Evelyn said gently. "It is seeing the value in things others discard and fighting for it, despite the fear." She opened the door to the waiting Bentley. "Now, let's go get your grandmother." As Clara slid into the buttery leather interior, which smelled of quiet power and success, she looked back at the silver spoon. Mel was already on the phone, likely with a contractor. Mr. Gable was staring, his coffee forgotten. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing out the world she had known forever. The car pulled away from the curb, as silent as a secret, accelerating smoothly toward her future. The following 6 months were a tectonic shift in the landscape of Clara's life. The private medical jet was the first tangible sign of her new reality. Eleanor, sedated and calm, was treated with a gentle reverence by the flight nurses that made Clara weep with gratitude. The Atherton Institute in Baltimore was not a facility. It was a campus, a world of serene gardens, sunlit rooms, and doctors who spoke of managing Eleanor's disease not as a burden, but as a complex, worthy challenge. For the first time, Clara felt not like a client, but a partner in her grandmother's care. Her own life transformed. The apartment in Blackwood Tower was a masterpiece of classic design, with views that stretched across the city she had only ever seen from street level. And her apprenticeship was more challenging and rewarding than she could have ever imagined. Silas Blackwood was not a gentle, doting mentor. He was a titan of his field, and he was demanding, brilliant, and gruff. He pushed her relentlessly, ripping apart her designs, challenging her assumptions, and forcing her to defend every line she drew. He was teaching her not just to design buildings, but to understand their soul. The legal battle, however, was a brutal, grinding war of attrition. Julian Thorne, true to his word, came at them with everything he had. His lawyers were sharks, filing motion after motion, attempting to paint Clara as a master manipulator. They subpoenaed her bank records, her employment history, her college transcripts. They put Mel on the stand, who testified honestly that Clara was always desperate for money, a fact they tried to twist into a motive for a sophisticated con. During a particularly grueling deposition, Julian's lead attorney, a slick, silver-haired man named Marcus Thorne, no relation, a cruel irony, leaned towards her. "Miss Evans, you, a woman on the verge of eviction, with a mountain of debt, wants this court to believe you just happened to stumble upon a reclusive billionaire, and just happened to have the exact architectural knowledge to entice him? Isn't it the truth that you researched him, targeted him, and played on his grief over his wife's legacy?" Clara sat in the sterile conference room, Evelyn by her side. She looked at Marcus Thorne, and she didn't see a lawyer. She saw a man like Julian, a man who could only see the world through a lens of avarice and suspicion. She remembered what Silas had told her in the rain. "Don't let them grind it out of you." "No, sir," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I saw an old man in a storm. I offered him a ride. I refused his money. And when your client, Mr. Julian Thorne, offered me a check to lie, I refused that too. The difference between us, Mr. Thorne, is that when you see a person in need, you see an angle. I just see a person. The turning point came on the final day of the hearing. Evelyn, who had been playing a long and patient game, called her final witness, Silas Blackwood. He entered the courtroom not as the frail, shivering man from the storm, but as the lion he was. He wore a simple, perfectly cut charcoal suit. He moved slowly, with the aid of a cane, but his presence filled the room. His eyes, however, were the same, pale blue and missing nothing. He sat, and in a quiet, firm voice, he systematically dismantled his grandson's entire case. He spoke of his wife, Eleanor, not with maudlin grief, but with a powerful, loving respect. She believed buildings should serve people, not the other way around, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She would have been so profoundly disappointed in you, Julian. He explained the concept of his social audits, his occasional forays into the world without the armor of his wealth, to see if the foundations of human decency were still sound. My grandson, he said, looking directly at Julian, who refused to meet his gaze, believes I am incompetent because I wish to use my wealth to build things for the public good, to invest in people rather than portfolios. He believes sanity is the act of endlessly accumulating wealth. This court must decide which definition it finds more compelling. And then he spoke of Clara. This young woman, he said, gesturing to where she sat, is not a defendant in this case. She is my Exhibit A. She is the proof that my audit was a success. She is proof that integrity still exists. She did not ask for my money. She asked about my well-being. She gave me her time, the use of her car, and her compassion, when she herself had precious little of any to spare. My grandson, in his entire life, has never offered me anything but a demand. He then had Evelyn produce the blueprints. Unrolled before the court, the plans for the Eleanor Blackwood Memorial Library were breathtaking. It was a soaring, beautiful design, full of light and grace. This was my wife's final gift to this city, Silas announced, a project my grandson wished to erase. I am pleased to announce that the Blackwood Foundation has fully funded its construction, which will begin next spring. And the lead apprentice on the project, the young architect who will help me see it through to completion, will be Ms. Clara Evans. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Case dismissed, with prejudice. The petition for conservatorship was denied. Mr. Blackwood was found to be, in the judge's words, exceptionally and enviably competent. Julian Thorne's face was a mask of white, bloodless rage. He had not just lost the case, he had lost his past and his future in a single, public blow. A month later, Clara stood on a wind-swept, empty lot overlooking the Schuylkill River. She wore jeans, sturdy boots, and a hard hat. A set of rolled-up site plans were tucked under her arm. The air was crisp with the promise of winter. A car pulled up, and Silas got out, leaning on his cane. "Heard from Baltimore this morning," Silas said, joining her at the security fence. "Eleanor's responding well to the new art therapy program. She painted a watercolor of a sunflower." Clara smiled, a real, unburdened smile. "Thank you, Silas." "No, Clara, thank you," he said, his voice quiet. "You gave an old architect a reason to build one last thing." He looked out at the empty lot. "It's a challenging site. Poor soil composition, zoning issues. It's going to be a fight." "I know," Clara said, unrolling the plans. "I'm good at fights." She was no longer a waitress drowning in debt. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was an architect, and she was just getting started. The world was full of Julians, who believed kindness was a weakness and legacy was just real estate. But it was also full of people like her, people who, despite being tired and broke and beaten down by life, would still stop in the pouring rain to save a stranger's dream, not knowing it would be the blueprint for their own.